Great. So welcome, everybody. This is the Ohio Association for College Admissions Counseling Virtual College Fair. And thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphones are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions happening, so be sure to sign up for additional sessions. And this presentation is being recorded and will be available within about a week at strivescan.com/Ohio. With that being said, I will turn it over to our first presenter, Josh.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. I'm going to share my screen here so that you can all see this. Welcome, everybody, to our session, Pulling Back the Curtain, How Selective Colleges Review Applications. My name is Josh Levy. I'm an Associate Director of Admissions at Oberlin College. I'm going to let the other two panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll move right on. So, Terry?
Hi, everybody. I'm Terry McHugh. I'm Senior Associate Dean of Admissions at Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio.
And I am Tom Fanning, Senior Associate Director of Undergraduate Admission at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio.
So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this session. What we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about how people on our side of the desk read your applications. What are the things that we look for? What are we hoping to learn by looking at these different pieces of the application? So we're going to actually look at 6 or so different things today, and you can see them here on the screen. The high school transcript, letters of recommendation, your extracurricular involvement, your personal statement, additional information that you might want to share with us, and then test scores. And so what we hope to do is pull back the curtain, sort of like in The Wizard of Oz, and help you understand how college representatives and counselors will read these different pieces of the application and find out or share a little bit of information about how to make your application stand out in the applicant pool. So we're going to dive right in, and we are going to go to the transcript. Terry?
Great. Thank you so much. So I do want to remind everybody that the title of this presentation, we're talking about selective colleges. The beautiful and amazing thing about the college environment in the United States is that there are close to 4,000 colleges, and they span selectivity levels. And it's really important to know that there isn't just one kind of college. And so we're talking right now just about selective college admissions, where there's the majority of colleges will accept almost all or most of their applicants. And we happen to be, at this moment in time, the three of us happen to be representing colleges that are on the more selective end of the continuum, where we are accepting less than half, and sometimes significantly less than half of the applicants. And I think I can say that for our 3 institutions, when we look at all the different parts of your application, we weigh the high school transcript most heavily. At Kenyon, I will say that we think of that as kind of the 4-year narrative of your academic experience. And so high school matters when we're trying to figure out, are you going to be able to thrive in our collegiate environment? Are you going to be able perhaps to hit the ground running in the classroom? Can we move you forward? Can you move us forward? And so we'll look at your high school classes. So what classes first were offered, what was available at your high school, and what choices did you make? And, for selective college admissions, a kind of a neat, maybe little rule of thumb, and, it's not a real rule, you can decide what you want to do with it or not, is think about taking the most rigorous course of study in which you can be successful. And successful doesn't mean straight A's. Successful means getting enough sleep, being healthy, having time to take part in extracurricular life, leading a balanced life. It's how you decide to define successful. But, places like Kenyon and Case and Oberlin are looking at what your school has to offer and seeing what choices you make. It can be very tempting, especially in the last 2 years when you've got lots of electives, to be like, oh, I've never liked X or Y discipline. I'm just going to drop that. And I think it's fair to say that we know when you get to college, there's lots of disciplines that you will never take a class in. And so I think that we and a lot of selective colleges like to imagine you getting this really nice foundation across English and foreign language and math and science and social studies, the 5 core areas in high school, knowing that that might be the last time you take some of those courses. So get your foundation, try not to skip those. We also look at trends in grades. By the way, people who work in admissions, they tend to really like 17-year-olds. Like we want to look for ways to say, oh, 9th grade, those grades weren't great, but boy, look at this growth. So we look at trends as well. I'll pass this on to the next slide.
There we go. Okay, so letters of recommendation. This is a part of the application you can't control. You can control who you ask to write your letters, but you can't control what they say. So what we hope that you think about is how can your letters of recommendation talk about you both as a student and as a person? I think I can safely speak for my 2 colleagues here when I say that it is exceedingly rare to have a letter of recommendation that doesn't speak positively about a student. I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've seen that. So knowing that the recommendations are all going to talk about you in really positive ways, what we're hoping is that these letters bring you to life in some way. They talk about you more than just a student in the classroom, but also as a person who's going to be on our campus and in our communities. And so some things to think about, you as a student and a person have changed since 9th grade. While you may have taken a class in 9th grade and really liked that teacher, they might not be the best person to talk about who you are at the time of going through the college search process. Now, if they've had you in 9th and 12th grade, that's different. They can talk about how you've grown over that time. Generally, we prefer recommendations from 11th and 12th grade, but that's something to think about because we want to know who you are today as opposed to who you were 3 years ago. You don't necessarily want to turn to a teacher whose class you got an A in. That's great, but maybe somebody whose class you struggled a little bit in, but they can show how you really worked hard, how you grew over the course of that class. They can show you as more than just a strong student, but as somebody who has that work ethic and that determination to really succeed. Something that we at Oberlin see is letters of recommendation that are not from academic teachers. Traditionally, we consider academic recommendations to be from people who taught you in English, math, social studies, science, or a foreign language. You absolutely, for schools like ours, need academic letters of recommendation. If you also want to submit something from another teacher, that's fine, but that should not replace the academic letter of recommendation. And the last thing I would say about these is more does not equal better. Just because you submit 10 letters of recommendation, at a certain point, we're not going to learn anything new about you that we haven't already heard. So think carefully. If a school says we only want 2, you might want to just stick with that. If they say you could submit a supplemental one, that could be fine. But an English teacher in 11th grade, an English teacher in 12th grade, and let's say a journalism teacher, that's not going to add more to you. But maybe 2 teachers and somebody who is an employer or a mentor for something completely different, that's going to help round out your personality. Okay. Next, we're going to turn to extracurriculars.
So we have just spent our first 2 slides talking about your academic performance and some evaluation from the teachers, those who will be recommending you. But realize that many of our institutions, so many of our applicants are really strong students, and we need to be assured that they're going to compete well in the classroom, prepared, motivated. But you know what? So much about selective admission goes into trying to figure out who you are and what you would bring to our communities. So inevitably, if you're going to a school that's a residential campus, you're going to go live there. And so we're very interested and intrigued by what you do beyond the classroom, because your existence on the college campuses is going to be much more than simply heading into a classroom and earning your grades. You're going to go live there many times. So really intrigued by what you do beyond the classroom. So that extracurricular section of the application is pretty important. And if you've had a chance to start to look, you'll realize that on the Common Application, and I think many of us use the Common Application, they give you 10 slots to complete your resume, so to speak, and 150 characters to explain each of the things that you do. And I'm here to tell you it's probably not enough for the richness of what many of our applicants I know do. So that section is important, and it doesn't mean you have to fill all 10 spots of that section, because many of us look at depth over breadth. In fact, it's not just counting the number of activities you've been involved in, but we look at the number of hours, the number of weeks, and the number of years that you've been involved in those activities. So we want to know what you do. What are you interested in? So using those spots carefully, making sure you're giving a good evaluation of what you've done is important to us, because again, this can be a differentiator when we go about making some of the admission decisions that we're going to have. So the first question on this slide is whether or not you should fill out the extracurricular section or the resume. My belief is, and my colleagues may differ a little bit, but use that section on the application. We're kind of trained in our reading process to look there first and fill that out as accurately as you can. But also realize that if that doesn't do justice to the kind of work that you've done, that's the important piece here. We want to know who you are and what you do. Is it better to do a few things consistently or a lot of things one time? Again, the depth over breadth issue is pretty big for us, and we're looking for what you're profoundly involved in. And by the way, when you start talking about activities, it helps in the reading process that students who might have told us they have an interest in a particular major, if there were activities or involvements beyond the classroom that connected to your academic interests, I can tell you from a reader on the college side, we love that. So those kinds of connections, if you found a true curiosity or something that you're really pursuing, well, that reads really well in a selective admission committee. So these things can be important. Don't take this lightly, and realize that you don't have to fill all the slots, but we're really intrigued by what you do. Next.
Great. So your personal statement and the essays that are part of the application. This is the part that you students control from start to finish. You are going to have the opportunity to write about almost anything you want. The Common Application has a series of prompts. I think it's 6, but literally you can write about anything you want. And so what we hope to see is you putting your best foot forward, helping us understand who you are, and telling us about something that's important to you. Okay. What we hope is that you can write a nice essay, that you take care when you write it, that you're focusing on spelling and punctuation. And that's going to help us get a feel for where your writing is at this point in your career. But it's also going to help us understand more about you. You can use the essay to elaborate on something from your extracurricular list. You can use your essay to talk about something completely different, a topic of extreme importance to you today. What we hope is that we learn something about you. Okay, I know that we're just finishing our admission cycle up. We're in the process of making final decisions, and every year, and this has happened this year, we read an essay and we say, boy, I would love to admit that student's grandmother, brother, best friend, but I didn't learn anything about the student. What we really hope is that we learn something about you, the student. So if you are writing an essay that is focused on another person, make sure to bring it back to yourself. What did you learn from the situation? What did you learn from that person? How have you changed or grown to take that experience into consideration? That's what we really hope. We never want to be left with boy, I would love to admit the student's grandmother, but I don't know a single thing about this student. So that's what we sort of hope to learn. Again, we also would love to see that you are a solid writer. We know that your essay is probably not going to be at the level of winning a Pulitzer Prize or a Nobel Prize in literature. That's fine. You're 17 years old. We don't expect that. But we hope that you take some care in writing an essay that uses proper grammar, that you make sure to, to proofread it, to look for spelling and capitalization issues. Because this is an essay that is going to help us understand what, or help us think about whether you are ready for college level writing. You can really write about anything. There are some topics you might want to avoid. I can safely say I don't ever need to read about the really intimate details of somebody's life, like super intimate things. That's not necessarily an appropriate college essay. There are lots of other things you could choose, but you could take almost any topic and make a really great essay out of it. The last point on the slide here is that there are some colleges that have that extra essay. Why do I want to go to this particular school? Take just as much care with that essay as you do with the essay that gets shared with every single college to which you apply. What you don't want to do is write a why do I want to go to Oberlin essay and forget to change the name of another university and leave that one there. Okay, we might both be amazing institutions, but that's going to say to us that you didn't really take as much care and that you think that both of our schools are exactly the same and that you could just change our name and it would still be a great essay. Doesn't necessarily work that way. The last thing I would say before we move off this slide is that, if we have an applicant who is a really strong applicant in every way, and we are looking to admit that student, an essay that is fine is probably not going to change that decision. Okay. Similarly, if we have a student who is, in our minds, really unprepared academically, for example, we see lots of D's and maybe some F's on the high school transcript, and we don't think the student can succeed in the classroom, writing a really great essay probably isn't going to get us to change the decision we might make on that application, because we are looking at that entire high school career, not just at one little thing you submitted as part of your application. Okay, next we're going to turn to additional information. Terry.
Thank you, Josh. You may have noticed at the end of Josh's slide, the one right before where he talked about personal essays and additional writing, the why insert school name essay, sometimes those are optional, right? And so I want to point out that when a school offers an optional essay, that is very different than what I'm talking about, the additional information. I would say that if you're really interested in a school and they offer an optional, tell us why you want to attend our school, I would take advantage of that opportunity to tell them why, or anything else that, is this optional opportunity to shed light. Additional information is different. The additional information section, do I need to fill this out? The answer is complicated, and a sort of a good filter for it is there something in my application that I feel I need to shed a little light on? I need to give a little texture. I need to give a little explanation. It's the sort of thing that, there might be a little red flag because first semester of sophomore year, my grades really went down. I've been consistent for the rest of the time, but there was a real dip. That might be the place where you say, I broke my leg and I lost, 6 weeks of school and I had to have surgery, and that really impacted my grades. You may not want to make that be the topic of your essay, but the additional information part might be a perfect spot to say, just explaining something that may have come up in your review of my application that you need a little more texture and a little more information on. So you may or may not have additional information that you want to share. I think talking to your college counselor or guidance counselor about whether to use that additional information section is a good idea. Perhaps you don't have a college counselor or guidance counselor. Maybe a trusted teacher, maybe you're working with an English teacher to work on your writing. It isn't a bad idea, again, to sort of tease out the should I or shouldn't I use the additional information. We can find it really useful. Sometimes, and I think my colleagues will agree, we'll read an additional info and say, oh, thanks for sharing that. That makes sense. That's providing a context by which I can better understand the whole application. And I'm so glad this student has shared that information. Now, COVID, here we are on screen in this COVID environment. And in this past year, where we've all had our first experience in this COVID educational environment, the Common Application has put on an opportunity for both schools and students to share how COVID has impacted them. I don't know if maybe Josh and Tom could say something, but I don't think I saw a school that didn't use the COVID, that they gave an explanation of how COVID impacted how schooling was done over the course of the students' high school experience in the last 12 months. And some kids talked about COVID and some didn't. I think that the sort of, you have to use a very sort of authentic filter. Does the college need to know how this impacted me? Because it really did impact me, and I need to share that. Believe me, we will want to know that. I think a more standard response, COVID meant that in April of my junior year, we went online for 6 weeks, and your school may be putting that in. You may want to do that, or you may not want to do that. We've had students who have done some reflections on how COVID has impacted them, and those have been useful. It's like a person reflecting on how this environment has been different from their previous years of high school. Sometimes we can really learn something from that. Sometimes they will finish with, in the scheme of things, I've been impacted, minimally, but I did want to share, the way I feel like I'm looking at the world in a different way because of this experience. So again, I use the word authentic. That's always your best filter. Think about what you truly need to be sharing, and then use your best judgment in that way. And always, if you can, turn to a trusted adult at your school too. Okay.
So if members of our audience have realized this, as we talked about selective college admissions, we have not talked about numbers yet. And we did that by design because, frankly, so much of the conversation about selective admissions tends to be lining people up by the numbers. And in my long career in college admissions, the most asked question is, what number do I need to get in? And it almost suggests that we line people up by the numbers. But at this point, we want to talk a little bit about the testing landscape in higher ed these days. COVID accelerated some discussion about the real utility of tests and what they really tell us. And most colleges have some data on trying to predict how a student might compete at their institutions. And I think most of us would agree that if you just use testing by itself, it doesn't do it. Some of us have data that might suggest that testing helps predict certain parts of what might happen on the college level. But frankly, again, it in and of itself hasn't proven to be a great predictor of how people are going to do, nor does it tell anything about who you are necessarily, and how you might, what kind of roommate you might be, and what kind of musician you might be for our different ensembles on the campuses. And then now COVID made everything more complicated in that the standardized testing couldn't occur or was canceled, or the sitting locations were 300 miles from your home. So we get it. In many of the schools that previously had asked for either SAT or ACT chose to be test optional, allowing students who might have had a chance to sit for a test and feels that was representative of one piece of evidence about their academic preparation. So many schools in the country allowed students to decide whether or not they wanted to send test scores. So I think the first point I want to make is we understand the situation, and we also know that as far as importance in predicting who's going to be successful on our campuses, testing it's much lower than many people think relative to the kind of questions that I get about how this works. So test optional, for those schools who are using test optional policies, allow a student who has, if they've had the opportunity to sit for the SAT or ACT, to send those scores as a piece of evidence saying, here's some added proof that I'm well prepared for the next level. A student may, though, feel that it's not representative of the kind of work that they've done, and realizing that it's only 2.5, 3 hours of your high school career, that compared to your daily work in the classroom and the kind of work you do outside of the classroom, what's more important? So I think our point here is that colleges get this, and many of us are test optional, and many of us have extended that test optional policy for future years. And whether or not it's become permanent, many of us are doing our own research to figure out if we can make really good decisions, choose the right students, have them find success at our institutions without these test scores. So if they are submitted, it's one piece of the puzzle. For instance, and it's important to note that colleges aren't simply lining people up by these numbers. And I'll give you an example of how this works. So at my institution, people who are interested in studying in the STEM fields or the engineering fields, you would presume that those students should probably have a strong background in math and science. And sometimes the math scores might be really important to us, where we might not be all that concerned about some of the other sub scores based on what a student might want to study at my institution. If there's a real strong math score and the other scores are not as competitive relative to previous averages that we might have quoted, or middle 50% ranges, that might be fine. Where if an overall composite is lower, that might mean nothing to us. So the point here is there's so much more nuance than simply lining people up by the numbers, and I want people to know that. Most schools that went test optional this year put in their statements and policy statements that were test optional for admission. They might have different policies if they were a scholarship school that considered test scores in the scholarship ranges, or in special programs. So you really have to pay attention to the school's policy on test optional, on whether or not they might be needed for some individual particular things. But by and large, I think we wanted to make the point that we're not lining you up by the test scores. And frankly, if you're going to line up by numbers, the transcript, as Terry said in the beginning of our program here, your academic performance day in and day out in the classroom is probably most important to us as we review files, try to predict who's going to be successful.
Great. So that's our presentation. I know there were some students who were on. We would love to answer any questions that you might have. Please go ahead and use the chat to ask those if you have any. And otherwise, thank you so much.
I actually have love to add something, a context that just occurs to me. All of the things we've just talked about, I think if you're on the receiving end of the talk, you might say, well, why is this important? Or what are you really doing here? And why do you care about, what extracurriculars, or why do you care about whether or not I chose to take AP Latin in my senior year in high school? So there are really 4 questions in admissions. One is, can the student do the work? Does the student have the right preparation? Have they learned something in the classroom? Grades are important there, the classes you took. The second question is, will you do the work? And that's a motivation factor. It's not, can you do the work? Most of our applicants can, but rising grades, especially if you head into more rigorous coursework, those trend lines are important. The third thing is, who are you? What do you bring to the school? What do you contribute to our community? And that belies putting a number to that, but that's your extracurricular record. Those are your recommendations. And then the last thing is, are you a great match for our institution? And that's a two-way street. Are we right for you, and are you right for us? And if we get to that conclusion, that's an admission at a selective institution. So those are the real questions we're trying to answer. And so I think when you hear that, maybe some of these things become almost common sense, as opposed to why do they need that? Why do we care how many hours per week you're involved in this? Because we're looking for depth in extracurriculars and such. So just if we wanted to start a conversation, I thought that might be fodder for a conversation.
Well, we actually got a question here. What role would you say teacher recommendations play in understanding applicants? Would one of you guys like to answer that? I talked about that a little bit earlier. It's possible the student came on after that. Would one of you like to share your thoughts?
Sure, I would be glad to. At Kenyon, we require one teacher letter, but most students end up turning in two, because I think a lot of colleges do require 2 letters. And what we're looking for, these teacher letters, they're a potential additional voice of advocacy for you. They give texture to who you are. Your writing helps with that. Your transcript, which, as I said, is the academic narrative of your high school experience. The way you spend your time outside of the classroom is captured by your activities. Those all help to give us a rounded picture of who you might be in our community, as Tom says. We're looking at all of that. But this person who has taught you day in and day out, and watched you grow as a thinker, and watched you grow as a learner, and watched how you contributed in the classroom, watched what you did when you had challenges with a particular course of study, they can give us something that really no one else can give us. So, and as Josh mentioned, virtually all the letters we read from teachers are positive letters. You're typically reaching out to somebody who is ready to be an advocate for you. But it's that textural piece, especially when they include an anecdote. Anecdotes stay with us. When your guidance counselor or teacher tells us a story about something, it means a lot more than a string of adjectives about who you are. We don't remember the string of adjectives, but we remember the little anecdote. And so I find them a wonderful part of getting the fuller picture of the student. And that's why we ask for it.
So we have another question, a really great one. If I graduate early and apply to college when I'm 16, will this hurt or help my chances of getting in? I think, I don't know that graduating early is going to hurt or help in and of itself. I think what we would like to see is an understanding of why you're graduating early. There are different reasons. They tend to fall into 2 categories. One is I have exhausted everything I can really do in the high school. I've taken most of the advanced classes. I'm not finding my high school challenging for me. I want to go and do more. Another category is I hate high school. I just want to leave and be done. And so, I think what colleges are going to look at is, what is your explanation for why you're leaving high school, why you're finishing early? How mature are you? Do we think that at 16, is there evidence that you are mature and prepared to be in a community with 18 to 22-year-olds? I think that's what's going to matter more than that you are 16. Tom, Terry, do either of you, how else would you answer this? Are there other points that you would make?
So Josh, I think that was a perfect answer, because the question was, will it hurt or help? And the answer is it depends. And I made a big point about a student joining our community, living on the campus. And again, the evidence of the maturity to come live in a residence hall and engage the community is the important piece there, I think.
Great. We had another question. This is slightly a different topic here. What have been effective ways to showcase what makes your school special when traditional methods like campus visits are severely curtailed? I would say, or not happening at all, as the case may be for different schools. So what are some ways that each of us have done some showcasing of our schools? Terry, what have you guys done at Kenyon?
You know, at Kenyon, we talk about being an intentional community, that nobody sort of lands on the Kenyon campus by accident. People are typically not driving by our 1,000-acre, beautiful rural campus in central Ohio. They're not driving down the road and saying, oh, look, I'm in Gambier and there's a college here, let me pull in. They've done their research, they've read about us, they understand who we might be, or intrigued enough to learn more, and they make their way to us. And it's the person who decides to choose Kenyon is typically saying something along the lines of, I want to be part of an institution where, you know, the actions I take and the sentences I utter go to the building of a community. And I want to be surrounded by others who want that too. And so without the opportunity to have you be on campus, to meet these human beings, I always say, Kenyon is one of the most beautiful places you will ever lay eyes upon, both in terms of the sort of the geography and the architecture. It's a stunning place, but it's the people who inhabit that space that make Kenyon Kenyon. So what we've done when you can't go meet them in a live way is we've tried to convert that living interaction with members of the community onto the screen. So we have live info sessions 7 times a week. Or 6 times a week, excuse me. So that you log in and you see 4 Kenyon students and an admissions officer. And it's a real open, authentic exchange of information. It's kind of a meeting of the minds, and and it feels real, like you're in conversation with real human beings. The same goes for the tours. We have 6 kinds of tours, special campus, and 5 specialized kinds of tours in English and creative writing, and for our film center, for sciences, for arts, for our Kenyon Athletic Center, the Lowry Center. And you get a live tour guide. There's a film, but you have a partner, 1 or 2 live tour guides who are talking to you, and they can stop the film and chat with you because it's a real exchange. We've also run lots of programs with faculty. We have this Learning at Kenyon programs where you can watch a faculty panel, really live and interactive, answering your questions, and then go off to a model or masterclass with these faculty members. So we've tried to make it human first and human to human connection. How about you guys? I'm not sure what you guys have been doing. I'm interested to know myself.
Tom?
You know what? So thank God for Zoom and all the technology to allow us to extend the human factor as much as possible. And as Terry was saying, we have some wonderful faculty members who are willing to be live. And we've been running these Zoom sessions, multiple sessions every night. So most of the students looking at us have had a chance to at least listen live to faculty members talking about their departments and some of the research that's going on. And we do the same thing with students. So I'm not sure this is much different than the wonderful things Terry just talked about at Kenyon. But the technology, I just marvel at the fact that we had to turn on a dime about a year ago. And I think some great things have come of this, because we can reach so many more people this way. Without people having to make the trek here. At least at some point they will want to, but at least to start your search, this is one of the ways you can start to narrow and watch the way a school presents itself. That's who they think they are. And there are differences if you look closely at how schools present themselves. So yeah, thank God for Zoom.
Yes. Okay, so we have 2 more questions. One of them is very quick. Are we recording this? Yes. We will be recording this, or it is being recorded. But the last question we'll turn to quickly is, what are the opinions on students who wait a few years after high school before applying to college, and do colleges look at them differently? That's a really good question. That's a tough one. I think, we're gonna try and understand what you've been doing, why you decided to wait a few years. There's a difference between taking just a 1-year gap year and working for 2 or 3 years and then deciding to go to college. Are we going to look at you differently? Perhaps just a little bit, because we know you're in a different place in your life. But I think if the student had a strong academic record, what we're going to want to know is, what have you been doing? We would love to hear from somebody. If you've been working, is there an employer or a mentor who can also write in support of you? Because your teachers might not have engaged with you for 3 or 4 years, depending on how long you've been out. We will look at you a little bit differently, but we still need to see how you did academically and how we think you can continue to do academically once you get to our institutions. Terry or Tom, anything that you want to add to that before I think we have to wrap up?
That was a great answer. Yeah, I think all of us are lucky in that we work at institutions where we really get time with an application. And I always say, we know the blood, sweat, and tears that students put into their applications, and we try to meet that by looking with depth and with care as much as we can. And so something like that, where it's, oh, this is different, we're going to go the next step and try to understand.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I know it's just now 5:45. I think our time is just about up, but thank you all so much for the questions. And again, our contact information is here. If you want to reach out to one of us individually, we'd be happy to answer questions and speak with you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, it's wonderful talk. I hope this was helpful for everybody. Good luck to everybody in their college searches.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And before the panelists head out, I just want to say great job and thank you for holding this conversation with us. A quick reminder for those of you that are still on, once you close this, there will be a quick survey of about 4 questions. Please take the survey to give us a little bit of feedback. There's more sessions available, so feel free to sign up for more. And for those that were asking about the recording, it will be available in about a week, and you can visit stripescan.com/Ohio, and you'll find it there. And thank you so much for everyone that came out, and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Yay, success.
All right.
I have a question. Did every time I got an email